Flynn was startled from his slumber by an indescribable yet unmistakable sound of a voice.
Playing with fire?
It asked, and that was when Flynn finally realized where he was, a refrigerated drawer in the local mortuary. It was not exactly the voice that had startled him, but what it had specifically inquired about. 60% of his body was covered in third-degree burns, something that was to be expected when an arsonist is trapped in the very blaze he started. It was odd, though. Only he knew of the cause of the fire. Over the course of the last 2 months he had spent in a medically induced coma, he was still semi-conscious in the way that he reacted to outside stimuli and voices. During the coma, he had no visitors, as they were all dead as a result of the fire. Reflecting back on things, Flynn wondered whether starting the fire had been a wise idea, but he brushed it off, for in his mania, that was the only logical choice. There was a light breeze on his left ear, followed by a different voice, the voice he recognized as his mother's.
How could you do this to us? No one was out to get you, and even if there was someone, we loved you no matter what.
Shut up, shut up, shut up! Flynn vocalized in the cramped stainless steel echo chamber, shouting at no one. Soft sobs were still occurring by his left ear, and that was when his nerve broke and he began to pound on the walls and ceiling, claustrophobia masking any remaining sanity. Flynn continued to pound until he pounded himself into unconsciousness, exhaustion proving too much. The curious mortician had ventured down the basement stairs maybe 15 minutes into his pounding tirade and paused at the bottom, eyes growing wider until they resembled saucers as he saw the small door of the compartment shake with each strike. Jim, the mortician, had nerves of steel and an unshakable stomach, why he got into this business in the first place. But this proved too much for him to handle, and he turned tail and ran back up to the safety of his cozy office. With shaking hands, he slowly poured a glass of scotch, intent on drinking the trauma into oblivion. Half the bottle in, he was calm and thinking clearly, and rationalized that he must have been hallucinating, as lack of sleep could obviously do to anyone. Jim made his way slowly down the stairs, not out of fear of what he experienced before, but fear of falling, as the bottle sat 3/4 of the way empty. He reached the bottom of the staircase, and through blurry eyes, tried to make out the door that had been the source of his earlier terror. From this vantage point, all of the doors blurred into one flat, silver wall. Squinting, he took a step towards the bank of corpse coolers, and that was when he heard faint sobbing. Leaning forward, he stumbled towards the wall and put his ear to where that noise appeared to emanate. Not even breathing, he strained to make out any noise other than the blood flowing past his ears, and heard nothing. At the point Jim gave up and attempted to stand up straight again, a loud gasp came from the door, making balance impossible, causing Jim to fall and crack his head on the plain, gray concrete floor. Stars filled his vision, making it impossible to tell whether the door opening was imagined, or if it was really happening. That was what Jim faded away to. Pain radiated from Jim's head, wrists, and ankles, and he slowly opened his eyes. He tried to lift his head, but to no avail. Straining his eyes around the room, a form slowly came into view, and when Jim could fully focus on it, he let out a blood-curdling scream and thrashed about the table, restraints on his wrists and ankles making it impossible for him to escape. Adrenaline was coursing through his body, and the panic intensified when the figure looked Jim right in the eyes. There was a snapping clatter, distracting the figure, and then a dull pain erupted in the figure's head, blurring his vision momentarily. In his state of panic, Jim had managed to free one of his arms from the restraints, breaking it in the process, something which he wouldn't feel for the next hour or so as he and the figure conversed. That's why I restrained you in the first place, Flynn grunted as he tried to maintain his balance, finding it difficult to stand after so much time of not being able to. You're a corpse diddler, right? Jim froze as he realized that the figure was addressing him, rendering him speechless. He forced out a confused mumbling.
What?
Yes, I'm talking to you, creepo. If I free you, you promise not to run off or hit me again? Jim couldn't really make any sense of the mundane, almost joking way that the figure addressed him. Jim cleared his throat and answered.
No, I won't do anything to you or run away. I guess I was just a bit anxious, seeing the way you looked at me and all that.
The figure didn't answer, but shortly after, Jim felt the pressure on his head and limbs dissipate and he sat up slowly, dizzy.
I didn't mean it earlier. I swear. Who are you?
Asked Jim as he found it in himself to face his captor, an average-looking man with the disadvantage of resembling a half-cooked pork roast. The skin on his face was nearly gone, exposing the muscle and some bone underneath. The upper portion of his body from neck to genitals was black and red, obvious how he died. Jim shuddered as his eyes glanced quickly at the figure's penis and saw nothing there but a shriveled black nothingness. The figure watched Jim look him up and down, wincing as he caught Jim stealing a glance at his family jewels, now completely worthless. He then answered, "The name's Flynn. Why was I locked in a drawer? The last thing I remember is being in a coma in the hospital." Jim furrowed his brow at Flynn, intrigued. "What am I doing in a mortuary?" Jim now raised an eyebrow at Flynn, nausea creeping in at the smell of rotting flesh and infection that had now reached his nostrils, yet filled with complete raw curiosity.
"You're dead. This is all just a bad dream. Any minute now, I'll wake up on the basement floor with a splitting headache and nothing more. Pull yourself together, damn it."
Jim spoke absently, as one would do if they were to perceive the current goings-on as just a really screwed-up dream. Flynn gaped at Jim, tears forming in what was left of his eye sockets, as the realization that everyone thought he was dead hit him. "But I'm not dead," said Flynn, a bit of arrogant defiance creeping into his voice. "All of you idiots screwed up, that's all. I'm in a coma. Got it? I'm not dead." As spittle flung from Flynn's blackened lips, landing in a fine mist on Jim's face, Jim was in pure shock, absently pinching his arm until it began to bleed, trying to wake himself up. Flynn was now weeping, and followed up with, "Am I?" Jim's shock broke with that question, and he shook his head in an attempt to clear it. He stepped towards Flynn with an outstretched arm, and ignoring any protest or gasp of pain, pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck, feeling for a pulse. The first pressure on his fingers made him jump back in surprise, as he realized that something was horribly wrong.
"No, this isn't possible. This can't be possible. No way! Could this even be possible?"
Jim murmured as he backed away from Flynn, still reeling from the chance that this man may still be alive against all explanation. "I knew it!" cried Flynn in excitement, for as Jim backed away, Flynn felt for a pulse and was rewarded with a weak thrumming beneath his fingers. "Can you help me? I gotta get out of here. If I'm still alive, they'll find me, and you too." Jim had a dreamy stupor on his face at the surreal nature of this odd circumstance. It was nearly too much, but this time, though his legs gave way, his voice did not.
"What? What are you talking about?"
Jim managed to choke out, leaning against the wall. "Don't you understand what I just told you?" Flynn had a look of hope mixed with fear in his eyes. "I was right. I'm still alive. If you don't understand that, then you're an idiot. The things that I tried to kill in the fire are still after me. I heard the voices when I was in that drawer thing that you locked me into." Jim rose to his feet, hands trembling against the wall as he steadied himself. Jim was still grappling with the notion that something like this was physically possible. Flynn approached him slowly, a little worried that the action would cause Jim further harm. "I need to tell you something," he said as he gingerly reached out and placed a hand on Jim's shoulder. Dazed, Jim nodded blankly and straightened up.
"Not here. We'll talk in my office,"
said Jim, motioning for the stairs. Flynn shot him a grateful look, but hesitated, anxious that fording the stairs could prove an impossibility. Jim recognized this hesitation and silently took Flynn's arm as they began to ascend the stairs, offering the necessary support. Flynn sat in a plush armchair, clad in a terry cloth robe. Jim knew that, if this weren't a dream, that anything more than that for clothing would cause Flynn great discomfort due to his injuries. Before that, Flynn had just stood there shivering with cold, and perhaps fear, and there was also the factor of the morbid appearance causing distraction from the true conversation that would unfold. Jim entered the room, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee and handing one to Flynn. Jim sat in a chair opposite him, unprepared for what he was about to hear. Flynn began after a small sip of coffee. "I told you that I tried to kill the things in the fire, and now I'll tell you why. It all started about 3 months ago, a month before I went into the coma. I was nearing graduation, and was really excited that I wouldn't have to worry about school for too much longer. One night, as I was studying for exams, I thought I could hear my parents fighting in the other room, and that always drove me nuts. I went over to my door and opened it, telling them to shut the hell up. I slammed the door and went back to my desk and turned my music up as high as I could take it. But the shouts and such still got louder and louder, and I started to cry. My parents hadn't fought like this for as long as I could remember, and even though I was 18, I felt like a little kid again, helpless to do anything about it. Then all of a sudden, it stopped, and I took off my headphones and listened. There was no sound anywhere in the house, and I opened my door and peeked into the hall, and saw that all the lights were out. I left my room and walked through the house, getting more and more nervous as I eventually realized that there was no one home but me. It hit me when I opened the door to my parents' bedroom. They were out of town for the weekend, as my little brother had a lacrosse tournament. My mind was reeling with that remembrance, and I walked back to my room, dazed. I woke to sunshine streaming in through the window. I didn't even remember falling asleep at any point, as I just remembered staring at my desk all night. I jumped in surprise as I heard my mother call out that they were back. Something was wrong. They weren't supposed to be back until Sunday, so why were they back one day early? Did something happen to my brother? Did something happen to one of my parents? I started to cry a little, worry coursing through me as all the possibilities of what could have gone wrong invaded every square inch of my head. I ran downstairs to be greeted by my mother in the kitchen. I looked around and saw my dad and little brother by the entrance of the garage, still taking off their shoes. My mother looked at me with concern, smiling oddly. It then occurred to me, no idea why it didn't earlier, to check my cell phone. I dropped it on the floor, chipping one tile as I saw that it was Sunday. I just shrugged and went back up to my room, deep in thought. Weird things kept happening for the next few weeks, but I just brushed it off as stress caused by exams and stuff, and I really didn't notice anything until the weekend before my last exam. Some family friend was in the hospital, and so my parents went to visit and left my brother at home. It was about 11 at night when I heard the fighting start up again, but I brushed it off, this time remembering that my parents weren't home, and so I thought my brother was just watching some movie with the sound up really loud, and I left it at that. I still couldn't shake the unease that the fighting voices sounded just like my parents, and I finally had enough when I heard my brother start in, screaming,
Stop! Stop fighting, please!
I jumped out of my chair and ran to the stairs, jumping the last 3 and nearly falling on my face when I landed on the floor below. I was in full-on protective mode, ready to call the police or even do something worse. When I finally focused on the room in front of me, the haze of red faded and I realized that there was no sound whatsoever, and all the lights were off. I just stood there, staring, not able to comprehend what was real and what was imaginary, and then a light turned on in the kitchen, breaking my paralysis. My brother had come downstairs for a midnight snack and was rooting through the fridge. As the fridge door closed, he saw me standing there and a brief look of fury passed across his face. My mouth hung open, and when I finally blinked, there was nothing there. I slowly climbed the stairs until I bumped into my brother. He looked at me, pissed off that I wasn't looking where I was going, but said nothing. I ran the rest of the way to my room and grabbed my head, silently screaming and willing all of this nonsense to just stop. I woke to pounding on my bedroom door and sat bolt upright. I was lying in bed, and my dad was shouting for me to get the hell up. I was late for school. I dressed quickly and opened the door only to be punched by my dad, still pounding on the door. I gave him a look and he lowered his gaze sheepishly. I made it to school and did my exam, and was back at home in a few hours, feeling confident that I did pretty well. I went and sat on the couch when I got home, and my parents entered and sat down opposite me. My mother looked as if she had been crying, and my dad had that look. You know, that look when someone's gonna die. I looked at both of them, confused, and suddenly their stare broke and they started screaming at each other. I had seen them fight when I was younger, and it was pretty traumatic. I covered my ears and shut my eyes, shouting for them to stop. The fighting continued, and I opened my eyes only to see the living room empty. They were still fighting, and it sounded like it was in the bedroom. I went to the garage and grabbed the gas can for the mower, and then ran to my parents' room to confront them, ready to take any necessary action to stop the feud. As I flung the door open, I fell to my knees when I saw what lay before me. My brother lay in the middle of the bed, looking as if he were asleep, flanked by my parents. My mother had deep purple bruises ringing her neck, and there was an empty liquor bottle beside a bottle of pills beside my father. I screamed, scrunching my eyes shut tight, and then I heard a voice from the opposite end of the room.
Playing with fire. Can I help?
I slowly opened my eyes, and I'll never forget what I saw. All 3 members of my family were sitting up, staring at me with intense white eyes. My brother's mouth was moving, and I could hear that phrase repeated over and over in my head.
Playing with fire? Playing with fire? Playing with fire?
I was outside of myself as I spun the lid off the gas can and let the gas flow out. My parents' voices now accompanied my brother's in my head, and I lit the match, and the next thing I remembered was waking up in the hospital. Flynn broke down in sobs as he finished his story, taking deep, heaving breaths. Jim stood and walked over to Flynn, putting his hands on his shoulders and trying to think of what to say. The moment that Jim's hands made contact, Flynn's eyes shot open and he looked at Jim with an intense fire raging in his eyes. "You have to go there. You need to find the truth," Flynn said as he collapsed out of the chair and onto the floor, each heaving breath growing weaker. Jim had the beginnings of tears in his eyes as he asked,
How do I get there?
Flynn's eyes remained closed as he said the last words he would ever speak. "You know where to go." The last breath hitched, and then Flynn's chest stilled for an eternity. Jim shuffled away from the corpse laying on the floor, a million emotions and thoughts racing through his mind. What did this kid mean? You know where to go. Jim eventually found the strength to stand and leave the office, closing the door gently behind him. Jim left the hospital with a little more hope of completing this task of finding Flynn's home. After some persuasion, the attendant at the hospital released Flynn's records, and Jim leafed through them, looking for an address, finding it moments later. He drove along, feelings of déjà vu invading his senses as he took the exit to the suburbs, and found himself driving along a familiar, tree-lined street. His heart leapt as the blackened ruins of Flynn's home came into view. The house was still intact, but it was in serious disrepair. Parking and then walking up the pathway, Jim instinctually reached into his pockets and felt for the key ring. At the front door, he found the right key and inserted it into the lock set, turning it and feeling the tumblers click. He grasped the handle and entered, memories of childhood flooding back as he took in the surroundings. Walking in a zombie-like state, he mounted the stairs and climbed them to the second floor, turning right and halting when he saw what lay before him. The wall of the master bedroom was completely obliterated, revealing the sight that brought back all the memories. The two larger bodies were frozen in agony, clutching each other as if to protect themselves from some unseen force. The smaller body between them lay peacefully, as if asleep, but sleep wasn't possible, considering the now charcoal hue of the marred flesh. Jim stifled a scream as he woke on the mortuary floor, the pain in his head forgotten as he tried to right his mind and forget the dream. Brushing himself off, he noted with a twinge of fright the cloud of soot that was stirred up as he brushed himself off. He soon stood up and climbed the stairs to the bathroom, where he took 6 pills and an aspirin, sitting on the toilet as the anti-psychs and painkillers took effect. He stared at his scarred hands and reflected on what just happened. Though the wounds had healed long ago, he couldn't help but feel the fear course through him as he imagined what they looked like all those years ago, black and red. Once the drugs had kicked in, Jim pulled a cigarette and lighted from his shirt pocket, lighting up with the words, "Playing with fire," echoing through his head. He shuddered as he exhaled, filled with worry that this was his life now, and he could never truly escape what he had done to save himself and his family. That was when he heard the pounding and shouts begin anew in the basement, and he stood up, dropping the cigarette into the toilet where it went out with a hiss. He slowly walked towards the office, ignoring the shouts and pounding, knowing that this would happen every day going forward. Pulling out a bottle of scotch, he sighed and poured the first and last drink of the night.